Good Sunday, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for September the 25th. Today we are reading together in Revelation chapter 12. Revelation chapter 12. Let me go ahead and get the text up on the screen for us and remind us of our normal preliminary ideas that the Revelation is an apocalypse. I do not believe that lends it to being understood in a totally literal sense. Apocalyptic literature is known for its dramatic symbolism. And although it might be difficult for us to maybe wrap our minds around with this not being a common genre of literature for us, it was very common to the Jews in the first century who were receiving this text. And um, it would have made a lot more sense to them maybe than it does us, and that's okay. We need to at least recognize that, and we can appreciate the value that it would have had for them, and yet that does mean that we need to put some effort into trying to understand the symbolism behind what is written. I think one of the best things we can do with the Revelation is to find the points at which it is rooted in the Old Testament and to examine those Old Testament texts in order to maybe understand a little better what exactly is going on. We definitely don't need to read our 21st century Western eyes into this text. We need to allow it to mean what it was supposed to mean originally to those who received the text, which reminds us that it is a prophecy. It is from God to mankind, giving us his divine perspective. And it is a letter. It is a letter written to specific people at a specific time for a specific purpose. And we need again to recognize that and appreciate that, and not become loosey goosey with the revelation. We need to be responsible whenever we read the revelation, and responsible with the conclusions that we draw from it. And again, I think another good point is to remind ourselves that it is not, I don't believe, a linear writing, meaning that it is not a narrative as Acts is, that starts at the beginning and ends at a point, and everything in between is in sequential order. I think it is very much cyclical in nature. As I mentioned yesterday, there's a lot of recapitulating, meaning restating the same kind of thing in different way in order to drive home the point. So just keep that in mind. Keep that in mind as we're reading through the text, to remember these important details, and again, to extend some grace to ourselves whenever it is maybe a bit difficult to understand various portions of the text. Don't beat ourselves up too much. Definitely still put in the effort to try to understand, but if we leave with a little bit of a headache, that's okay. This is a difficult text in many ways, and yet we're doing our best, at least in this reading, to just read and take away a few good thoughts from the text. Maybe this will encourage you and motivate you to do some study on your own, in your own personal time on the Revelation. That certainly would be time well spent digging into God's word. But thanks again for tuning in on this Sunday morning. Let's go ahead and read through the text of Revelation chapter 12. We're introduced in this cycle, and I do like calling these cycles. One particular writer that I'm reading through his commentary on this is Dan King, and he does present the text in cycles. He's got the opening couple of chapters, then the next cycle being the letters to the churches. Then there are the throne scenes. Then there's the seals that are open, that seal cycle. Now there's the trumpet cycle. Eventually there would be the bowl cycle. So there's various cycles that are presented to us. And again, I think a lot of them are representing some of the same things, just in different language. But here within this particular cycle, we're introduced to these new characters: the woman, the child, and the dragon. And I think a lot of it really is self-explanatory. Who these characters are. The woman, I think, representing Israel. At times, I think here in the beginning, we have Israel from a national perspective, a Jewish lineage perspective. But then I think that morphs a little bit into looking at spiritual Israel, a new Israel in the form of the church. The child, I think, pretty clearly is representing Jesus by the language here. The dragon, the evil one, the Satan, the devil, our adversary, is mentioned here as well. So keep that in mind, and we're going to see some familiar themes of persecution and preservation by God, and deliverance, praising God for the deliverance that is granted to those who trust in Him. So we'll see that as we go throughout this text. But just try to keep in mind as best you can. Again, that we're probably looking at things that we've looked at before already, just kind of seeing it from a different perspective and through different with different characters involved, at least the way they're described being a bit different. So reading here then in Revelation chapter 12, a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in labor and agony as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven. There was a fiery red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on its heads were 7 crowns. Its tail swept away a third of the stars in heaven and hurled them to the earth. And the dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that she did not give birth so that when she did give birth, it might devour her child. She gave birth to a son, a male who was going to rule all the nations with an iron rod. Her child was caught up to God and his throne. The woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God to be nourished there for 1,260 days. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels also fought, but he could not prevail, and there was no place for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was thrown out, the ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the one who deceives the whole world. He was thrown to earth, and his angels with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have now come, because the accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been thrown down. They conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they did not love their lives to the point of death. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the earth and to the sea, because the devil has come down to you with great fury, because he knows his time is short. When the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who had given birth to the male child. The woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, so that she could fly from the serpent's presence to her place in the wilderness, where she was nourished for a times and a half time. From his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river flowing after the woman, to sweep her away with a flood. But the earth helped the woman. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the river that the dragon had spewed from his mouth. So the dragon was furious with the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring, those who keep the commands of God and hold firmly to the testimony about Jesus. Revelation chapter 12. The main drama here, of course, is there is the enemy, and the enemy is seeking to devour the child. And again, this is, I believe, pretty clearly showing the devil's efforts against Jesus. Yet what I noticed as I read throughout this text is that the woman, again, representing maybe Israel and spiritual Israel, I noticed on a number of occasions that though there is persecution, especially verse 13, he persecuted the woman. Even though there's persecution, we also see that the woman is nourished. Not only that, but in verse number 11, the text says that they conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they did not love their lives to the point of death. Whenever we think about the Lamb, as was given, the image of the Lamb that was given in chapters 4 and 5, remember that John heard, behold, the Lamb of Judah, but then he looks and he sees the Lamb, the sacrificed Lamb. We see then that Jesus attained victory through sacrificial death. And that's the image that I see here within this text as well. So it's not here Jesus, although he's mentioned, they conquered by the blood of the Lamb. They conquered by emulating the way that Jesus conquered. They conquered by being willing to give up their lives in order to reject sin and wickedness and rebellion against God. So as we read here, we read of persecution. Again, that's the context that's happening here, is there's persecution against God's people. And yet, as there continues to be persecution, there also continues to be nourishment from God toward his people. Whatever that persecution looks like, whatever point in history this is detailing, we need to recognize that, and we need to embrace that reality that when God's people might be persecuted by the enemy, that doesn't mean that God is not going to help to sustain them through the nourishment that he gives. And we ought to even have the mindset that we see of Jesus first and foremost, that he achieved victory by giving his life. These disciples that are mentioned here, they're doing the same thing. Are we willing to do the same thing? Now, I'm not even talking about persecution to the point of physical death, but we need to recognize that we are only going to achieve victory by giving our lives to Jesus. We are sacrificing ourselves. We are offering ourselves as a living sacrifice to Him, per Romans chapter 12. That we, whenever we come to Jesus, as Paul says in Galatians chapter 2, we are crucified with Christ. We give up our lives. We die to self so that He might live through us. So in many ways, the realities of what was taking place in the first century of these Christians continues to be true today, and not a literal persecution and not a literal sacrifice for us, but a spiritual persecution in many ways. We are persecuted by the evil one. We are tempted. We are assaulted on every side to try to give into temptation and give into sin and give into wickedness. But if we trust in God, He will nourish us. He will protect us. And through even giving of ourselves in order to allow Christ to live in us, we will gain life in that way. We will gain true life and true blessings through Jesus, or we'll have true blessings in God through Jesus. And what a wonderful thought that is, that even whenever we, again, are persecuted, God is with us, God nourishes us, and He will sustain us to have victory in the end. Even as we read through a difficult text like Revelation 12, where we might not be exactly sure what is being referenced here very specifically, we still take away this general truth that though persecuted, God continues to nourish us, so long as we hold firmly to the testimony about Jesus. May we hold firmly to that testimony even today. Thanks so much for tuning into this reading on this Sunday. Hope that you have a great rest of this Lord's Day. Really looking forward to being with everyone here in a little while as we gather for Bible classes and a worship assembly. I'll be talking today about the issue of conferences and councils and creeds. I want to bring up a case from a few years ago where there was an issue within a particular denominational structure. I want to look at how they went about addressing that issue. And then I want to compare that with a case study that we have in Acts chapter 15 and draw some conclusions from that so we might know better how to tackle issues that might arise within our local churches, within our local church families and communities of faith, wherever we might be. Looking forward to studying that with you here in a little bit. Again, thanks for tuning in. Have a great Sunday, everyone. Take care and God bless.